Welcome to part 2 of the opinion piece with Mark Farmer. This week we're going to be talking about industry image, ageing workforce, and more importantly, how we're going to get youngsters in to join the industry. Mark, welcome back.
Thank you, Eddie.
You did allude to this in both reports, ageing workforce, bit of an image problem with the industry. Do we need a mass rebranding, or we got to kind of look within to get youngsters to come and join us again?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and having more recently conducted the Industry Training Board review, which is a separate subject in itself, but having done that 8-9 years after Modernise or Die in 2016, when I first talked about this ageing workforce issue, my view on some of the solutions is slightly changed. We definitely have an image issue. The relative attraction of the industry compared to other potential career paths, particularly in the context of wider societal change. What kids want to do now is different to what it was even 10 years ago. We have a challenge. We have a challenge of getting our industry up that pecking order in terms of being seen as an aspirational place to work. Saying that, and this is the bit that was an interesting sort of an eye-opener during the ITB review process, the level of kids wanting to come into the industry is not as low as we think. We have an attraction issue, definitely, but we also have an absorption issue. So one of the problems we have is that the kids that are on the sort of periphery of the industry post 16, who decide, for instance, to take construction courses or whatever, our ability as an industry to absorb them into paid traineeships and apprenticeships is limited. So what's happening is we're hemorrhaging potential workers that would be coming into the industry through a process of FE not being aligned to what the industry wants, but then the final sort of absorption of taking apprentices on has a headroom on it, which is actually lower than the people that are actually looking to get into the industry. So, the ratio of kids that end up in apprenticeship courses relative to who started at 16 on a construction-related course is like 65% reduction. So we have to fix that, I think, as one of the things. And then we have to also, parallel to that, work on this issue about rebranding the industry. How do we get our industry competing in a world where everyone wants to be a YouTube influencer now, wants to do things that are different to what even was the landscape 10 years ago? And that is difficult, but it's doable because our industry is in such a unique place in terms of what we do and the impact we have in the big wide world.
I don't know why we don't celebrate it more. So the classic thing I said with Kevin Hollinrate the other day when we were in Parliament, you've got people flying in all over the world to take pictures of stuff we built with our hands. And obviously Parliament's a great example. It's quite a nice building. Yep. You look all across the country, the Cotswolds, the castles up north and Scotland and in Wales. Why aren't we proud of this? Because one thing which I think is wrong, and it was going to be the last question, but I'm going to bring it now, the whole education system. So when I look at my kids, reception year 1 and 2, they came home, you remember, with toilet rolls and shoe boxes. It's in our DNA to create and make stuff. Yet you get into sort of 3, year 4, there's an iPad and it's sucked out of you. And I think the education system has got to be looked at pretty, because there are two of us. There's the academics who work with these, and then the vocational people that work with hands. It's pretty obvious early on who's going to do what.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think the institutional backdrop to our education system is one that will always try and promote the academic pathway in front of the vocational pathway, albeit I think that is changing. And there's certainly, I sense, a pivot from the idea of going to university and getting a degree to the idea of actually, earning while you learn and doing an apprenticeship of some kind. But notwithstanding that, I think, the influencers through our formative years are going to be our teachers. They're going to be, certainly latterly as you go towards 16, careers advisors at schools. And I think our industry does not have the right level of penetration with those key influencers. Yeah, so it's seen as a career of last resort, unfortunately, particularly for those that haven't necessarily done well academically.
They're told that. The kids are told it. If you're a bit thick, go into construction.
It's reinforcing. It's self-reinforcing, which is making the problem even worse. So this pecking order, which is absolutely opposite to how it's done in Germany, for instance. We were talking about Germany off camera, and that is a really good often quoted example of a country that has set up parity between vocational and academic professional qualifications, so that being a master builder is the same as being a solicitor or an accountant. So that starts in schools. That starts with cultural acceptance of where the industry is in terms of its importance. Germany and Austria and other countries in Europe, and actually, globally, seem to have got that. I think we still struggle with this idea that it's, if you're in construction, you're a second-class citizen.
Is that a class problem?
Maybe
because I look at the way I'm looked at when I walk down the high street. Obviously, if I'm in Parliament, I'm going to look quite smart. If I'm on the tools for the day and I'm covered in sand and cement, if I've got a smart outfit like you on, it's a different. Is that a class system that we've got to break down?
Because possibly, and I think it also plays to the image. Where is the image of our industry coming from? And unfortunately, one of the things we have to solve is the idea of like cowboy builder, which is so often talked about now, particularly in an age of, social media, and media interest in our industry has picked up over the last 10, 20 years, and not necessarily in a good way. It's always focusing on the stuff that's been done poorly, particularly in house building. And there's been a lot of attention on poor quality house building, and the idea of rogue traders and et cetera working in construction. And, you get it in every sector, but construction seems to be right in the eye of the storm.
Do you know what I don't like about that? Having worked in Channel 4 and BBC and ITV, it makes good telly. Yeah. And that's not helping us as an industry.
No.
Because when I was working, I said, look, we could do a really inspirational series here. Follow some brilliant people, men and women on the tools, operating machinery, whatever they're doing in their office, to inspire, make people realise how good it doesn't really make good TV. And I find that frustrating, because it is such a brilliant industry. We've both been in it. Well, we found out we started in the same year.
Absolutely.
Is that something, now the media are picking up all the negatives, it's up to the industry to go back and say, great industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the idea of, I wouldn't call it sensationalism, but, there's a version of that, which is actually picking up on a negative story and then, blowing it up in front of the public. You can argue there's a good side to that, which is perhaps it drives behaviours. So actually, if you're a house builder, for instance, and all of a sudden you're subject of a Channel 4 documentary about quality, it would invariably have an impact in the boardroom, which should be a positive one, which is to sort things out. But the collateral damage from that is this constant positioning of the industry as having all of these problems, not being an aspirational place to work, all about people that are doing a poor job. And I think that plays to some of the issues we perhaps have to be honest about in the industry around how do we face into lifting standards as being one of the routes to improving the attractiveness of the industry. And that is sort of self-fulfilling to an extent around making sure that everyone in the industry is doing a good job and is competent to do a good job, because that sort of professionalises the idea of working construction. And that in itself is a huge challenge to resolve, but it's one that, I'm very firmly of the opinion that we need to police better who's working in the industry, and that, the rising tide lifts all boats type of analogy there. But the media stuff has unfortunately damaged the industry. We need to be using that kind of media channel in a much more positive way, one that absolutely plays to the great stuff we do. We're a unique industry. I say it a lot, and the phrase is used a lot, that your CV is all around you. It's the physical buildings we create. And I always look, wherever I go, I look at buildings that I've been involved with, and I just remember the story about that job. Going back to 1988 when we first started out, all of my jobs are out there, increasingly diverse in locations, but I'm really proud of that. And that as an industry is the uniqueness we have. We have a physical impact on the built environment that working in, some other sectors and trades is not there. It's not tangible. We're all about tangible.
Driving the kids to school, and I did that house, put an extension on that house. I think so many trades are the same. One of the hardest things is, and your most recent report, and I think it's probably more now, from what I've heard, 30% of the workforce due to retire in 10 or 15 years. How do we keep skilled, energised, successful people in? And a great example, 2 weeks ago, I was getting a coffee, and it was pretty obvious there were two tilers behind me. They looked like a walking bag of tile adhesive. And anyway, chatting away, and they're like, we're done. I said, what do you mean? They said, we're getting out of the industry. And I reckon they were about 52, 53, around there. Clearly experienced, clearly good at what they did. And they said, we're getting knocked 70 miles away from home, not happy where I'm staying. We're not valued. The rate per square metre, if they're on site, work's dropped. How do we keep these good people?
Yeah, it's a real problem. I think the issue of accelerated retirement really concerns me, because actually all of the projections that you see around the labour force are based on conventional retirement age. The reality is, in many of the physical site trades, people are leaving way before that. They're self-employed. It's their decision as to when they withdraw themselves from the labour force. And I get those anecdotal stories of what you just described there. I hear a lot. And it worries me that in difficult periods in the industry, and we've been going through one of those the last few years where, it's tougher to find work. Actually, prices are perhaps a bit tighter. Some, highly experienced and very skilled workers are just saying, I'm out. I don't need this hassle. Maybe they've saved enough in the last growth period to say, I can afford to go a bit earlier. That's a huge risk to our industry, because actually the projections are bad enough as they are in terms of, statutory retirement age, attrition in the industry. If we've got people leaving before that, that's even worse. And I sense that's what's happening. We have a hollowing out, as they call it, in every difficult period in the industry. When we have boom and bust cycles, I think we've seen that. I think the numbers from pre-COVID to where we are now, we're down about 20% on the workforce. That's not sustainable. So if we're going into a growth period through, on the back of what government wants to do, build new homes and build infrastructure, we're starting from a lower base. And that the growing pains of re-inflating the workforce, training new people is tough. It's a long burn to get those people to keep, and it's all about attraction and retention. Yeah, the retention bit is often forgotten about, and we attract, albeit we need to work harder, as we've just described, in terms of how we do that. But more importantly, how do we keep those people in the industry motivated and actually utilised? Because part of the issue we have as an industry, particularly in housing, but I would say it's a broader issue, is that the industry workload peaks and troughs. We have projects that come and go. We have pipelines that oscillate. Job security is always a little bit edgy, and we have long periods of growth where everyone thinks, that you're only going to be, permanently employed, and then all of a sudden you have a downturn and actually you're scratching around for work. That's not a good backdrop to keeping people.
I think as well, the reality on the ground, and we hear it all the time, youngsters taken in as an apprentice, doesn't matter what it is, spark, bricklayer, roofer, they need to be taught and not used as cheap labour, sweeping up, bumping stuff around the back of that, whatever it is. And I appreciate, that's how I learned, but they need to have more focus, because losing half of them after year one is pretty good. Yeah. But, pretty bad, apologies. But the reason I said good is we want to finish on some good news this episode. £600 million from government. They obviously have a slight realisation that the 1.5 million is never going to be done in a month Sundays, but let's look at the positive. 600 million. However, CITB and CLC are going to be working together to distribute it. Is that the right thing? Because my fear is a lot of the tier 1 and tier 2s are going to bump up all their workforce. We're not going to have many new people coming in. But again, I might be wrong. I just think we need more people coming in big time to the industry. And obviously the image of CITB and CLC through some people isn't great. We can't rely on the construction minister, judging by her talks recently. Not really that switched on. Is it the right people looking at that money, distributing it? And are there any KPIs to see if actually it's worked?
Yeah, so I think firstly it's a positive, it's a good thing that government has seen construction skills as a focus area and has backed it with money. Yeah. So that's got to be welcomed, come what may. £625 million. The issue, as you just alluded to, is all about how it gets spent, and what do we focus on that's going to give us biggest bang for our buck. So a lot of the conclusions of my recent industry training board review quite critical of CITB in terms of how do you show additionality. So if CITB didn't exist, what would the comparative position be? So what are you bringing to the party around collecting the levy. The CITB have the statutory power to collect the levy and then redistribute that money back out into industry to drive outcomes. And my assertion was that it's not always clear that those outcomes are sufficient. We should be getting more bang for our buck, which is a function of where their activities are focused, where the attention is most placed around, where you can get more money for more bang for your buck, if you like. And I think the £625 million, not all of it is in the gift of CLC or CITB. Some of it is DFE initiatives, and some of that including things like boot camps. There'll be other stakeholders involved, including combined authorities and devolved government, etc. But clearly, a chunk of it is going to be under the governance of the newly appointed Construction Skills Mission Board, which is
no SME representation whatsoever.
So I would say that is a question mark.
The question that we've put to them is it me as CEO or somebody representing? No. We need someone that knows what's going on out there on the ground and how they can be upskilled, how we can get more apprentices in, because it's back to the tier 1 and tier 2s leading everything.
So look, one of my initial observations on the Construction Skills Mission Board, I think the intent is good. I never question the intent. It's all about execution with me. Yeah. I speak bluntly. I'm known for being a blunt speaker. That mission board has to be hardwired to outcomes. It can't just be a talking shop where you meet, whenever the governance is going to dictate and talk about issues that, and then when you leave that meeting, nothing happens. It has to be hardwired to outcomes. One of my concerns is that one of the overriding missions of that board is to attract another 100,000 workers into industry every year. Firstly, again, I welcome the ambition, but I think it just doesn't. It's not rooted in reality of the challenges we face. And secondly, I think it reinforces a focus on just looking at new workers rather than focusing on existing workforce. One of my conclusions of the review is that there's so much we need to do in terms of upskilling and interacting with the standing workforce. 2 million plus workers, 1 million of which are on site. We need to be doing things, including funded programs that lift competency, drive support, particularly for SMEs. Yep. And actually this constant battle we have of redistribution of the levy from big businesses to small businesses. And making sure it's injected into the right parts of industry. Lots of micro businesses just won't engage with things like the levy and CITB support because they either see it as too complex,
it is
too much bureaucracy, they just don't understand it, so they just crack on on their own pathway without support. And I think the biggest challenge we have around apprenticeship absorption is that there's a disconnect between employers and the trust they have in the quality of the kids that are coming through and what FE have taught them. And actually, even if they're funded by the levy for the cost of the apprenticeship, it's the indirect cost to the builder, the small builder, that concerns them because they had to be mentored. So actually, that's a productivity drag. So that if you've got a mentor that's not doing their job and actually looking after an apprentice, that you have to account for that in your working model. And there's lots of businesses take that hit. Yeah. They take that hit because they know they've got to bring apprentices on. But it's increasingly a difficult sell, particularly in a tough market like we are at the moment. So we've seen drops in apprenticeship numbers in the last 2 or 3 years, which is probably a reflection of the economic cycle. But the mission board absolutely needs to be accountable. That's going back to accountability. You can't just have a talking shop and then you get to the end of 4 years and you haven't done what you said.
Especially with that amount of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, and actually it's a lot of effort going in that if it all proves not to have made a difference, people are going to question why bother. So I think there's it's a good problem to have in some respects because there's money there and there's momentum behind it, including governmental support, ministerial support, but we have to make the most of it. And for all the reasons we've talked about, the complexity of how you do that cannot be underestimated. And it absolutely needs the right stakeholders around that table. To your point of SME representation, I'm a little bit nervous that you've got big players around that table. You have a secretariat that includes SME federations, etc. But is it really hearing the problems on the ground from the people that are actually doing the work and actually employing the people?
A view we share. We could talk about this topic for hours, but run out of time. Next week, mental health and wellbeing in construction, certainly a topic very close to my heart.